As a seminarian, I remember one year being at a Good Friday service, and at that Good Friday service, the person who was preaching for that day didn't focus a lot on the death of Jesus, instead focused much more on the resurrection. And after this service, I was sitting down with some of my close friends, and one of these friends was clearly upset, and so we asked him, what was wrong. And he expressed his displeasure at what had happened during the sermon and said, why can't we just have one day where Jesus is dead? And why can't we? And that is the crux of our faith. We would have no faith, no resurrection, without the crucifixion. We in faith often try to stay on the positive, to look at the bright things, the bright side of life. And that's all well and good, except when sorrow or bad times hit. Then it's difficult to keep up those appearances of being positive and happy and joyful. It's in those times of difficulty and sorrow that trying to remain positive, trying to look on the bright side of life, seems just a little bit hollow. We shouldn't sweep Jesus' death under the rug. We certainly shouldn't sweep our emotions about this event or about anything that we are sorrowful about under the rug. We should talk about these things. We should talk about how we feel. We should allow those emotions to rest with us. We should allow ourselves to feel these emotions of sorrow and sadness. We shouldn't sweep Jesus' death under the rug like it didn't even happen, or certainly that it didn't have to happen. Talking about Jesus' death, talking about death in general, is a difficult thing. But it's particularly difficult for us to talk about Jesus' death because of what it means. And I don't just mean this, that Jesus' death was a sorrowful thing. That's not why Jesus' death makes me sad. It's not just because Jesus was the best human being who ever lived, because he was, or that he was better than any human being who could ever exist, because again, he was. That's not why I'm sorrowful that we put this wonderful human being to death. The sorrow I feel is at what that death means. Because it means that God, in order to reconcile us to him, had to die on the cross. It means that that is the depth of our sin in this world. That to reconcile us to him, Jesus had to die. I don't particularly like talking about sin. I don't particularly like talking about my own sin or thinking about it. It's hard and it's difficult. Looking at my own sin reminds me of the awfulness that is within me. It reminds me of the awfulness of the world that is around me. It's a reminder of the brokenness of this world and the terrible, messed up nature of the world around us. And it reminds me that the world is messed up for only one reason. Because we did it. Because I messed up. Because we all messed up. That's the reason there's sin and sorrow in this world, because of us. Now, we could sweep those emotions under the rug. We could refuse to talk about them. But doing so would be a disservice. It would be a disservice to Jesus' death. And it would frankly take away the hope that we have through that death. And no, I'm not talking about the hope that we have in the resurrection, although we do have that too. I'm talking about the hope that in the midst of our sorrow, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of the brokenness and messed up nature of this world, Jesus is there with us throughout everything that happens, throughout every messed up event, throughout every pain and every sorrow. Jesus is there with us, present in that pain and suffering. We know that because of his death on the cross. We know that because Jesus died in one of the worst and most painful ways imaginable. He died in a way that was meant to be cruel and humiliating, that no Roman citizen would have ever gone through, that only criminals, only those who were seen the worst of the worst, would have suffered in the Roman Empire. And we also know that Jesus is there present with us in our sorrow, because the words he uses, the words that we see in our text from John, the words we see from the other passion narratives and the other gospels, come from the very same words that we say in the midst of our sorrow. Many of them come from the very psalm that we read today, Psalm 22, a psalm of David. So we know that when we suffer, Jesus used the exact same words that we do. We know that in the midst of our sorrow and our suffering, in the midst of disease and destruction, in the midst of sin and despair, God is there with us. Jesus is there with us, walking with us always. So let us not sweep Jesus' death under the rug. Let us see it for what it is. It is hope for us. Because when we suffer, when we are in sorrow, when we hold on to those emotions in our lives, we can know that God is there with us. We know that Jesus is there with us. We know that we have a companion on this journey, and that no matter what we go through, Jesus is always there, walking with us.